Hey, Chad here. Just to let you know that Mike and I recorded this episode the same morning that Travis was forced to resign as CEO from Uber by its investors. Stay tuned for our thoughts on Travis's history at Uber and how he's navigated the unprecedented growth and controversy during his tenure. Thanks for listening. Now on to the show.
Welcome to the Moonshots Podcast. In fact, episode 2. We're back. And I am your co-host, Mike Parsons, and I'm joined by the man with the plan, Mr. Chad Owen.
How are you, Mike?
I'm doing great. I'm enjoying the sunshine here in Bucharest, and I trust you're keeping up your end in summertime there in New York.
I am. What's taking you to Bucharest?
Oh, Bucharest is work. Building a very interesting app for a large co-working space with all sorts of magical door entry, IoT, and cool stuff. So it's keeping me out of trouble, you might say.
Yeah, I just got back from your old stomping grounds in San Francisco, filming a TEDx conference, TEDx Soma, there last week, and be on the lookout for some new videos on the TED channel from that conference.
Yeah, what was it like shooting a TED? That must have been pretty cool.
That was fun. I had the easy job. I think the curation and getting all of the speakers and presenters up to par is probably the hardest part. It's easy to show up with the cameras, but I thought everyone did an amazing job, and just kudos to the TEDx Soma team for putting on an amazing event.
Right, and the one thing that's to me really signature about all TED events is, my gosh, do they get their speakers like on point, really clean, very, very smooth. Did you get to see how they do that? Like, how do they get everyone so well prepared?
A lot of rehearsals. Yeah. And they
Really?
Yeah. I think they kind of relentlessly be sure that everyone's on point, because they want to create a great experience for everyone, and so that they can get on to the TEDx media channels and be promoted there as well.
Oh, right. Of course, because if it's TEDx, it's not a guaranteed posting into the TED network. So if they do a great job, lots of rehearsals, everyone's shining. Very cool.
But enough about me. Yeah, what do we got on the docket this week?
My question to you, so we have to admit that our listeners probably were expecting Jeff Bezos, which we had told everyone we were going to do, but the little news fairy took hold of things, so we changed things up. So what's in store this episode?
Well, I think it would be hard for us not to talk about Uber and the founder, CEO, Travis Kalanick. So that's who we've queued up on the show this week.
Yeah, and I've got to say, it culminated news of this week, just for our listeners in case they haven't heard. Travis is taking a leave of absence from the company, and it really comes at the end of a whole series of scandals for the company this year. I put a bit of a list together here, Chad. But for you, what's been the most striking scandal at Uber over the last 6 months?
It's really hard to overlook the fact that Eric Holder, the former Attorney General of the United States, his firm has been hired, to look into discriminatory and shady dealings within the company. So for me, that's kind of the hardest thing to overlook.
Yeah, it is. It's really like sending in like a Jedi Knight to come and do a one-over on the place. And what was interesting? The company has in fact adopted all of his recommendations, of which at the core of it was basically pulling apart Travis, the CEO's role, and assigning out his work to other individuals. But I mean, just for such a hot startup, for a startup that has achieved so much, I think it's important to put the last 6 months into context and to also realize what achievements have actually been done there at Uber. So first of all, just in 8 years, they've hit $6 billion in annualized revenue. They have a valuation of post $60 billion. They're now at well over 12,000 employees, enormously valued for the private sector, fastest growing company. They've created millions of flex jobs. One thing I wanted to ask you, Chad, like every time I'm in an Uber, no matter what country I'm in, the Uber drivers, for all of the challenges that they have with Uber, they love the flexibility that the job offers. What do you often get from Uber drivers when you're driving around?
For me, it's always been, I love that I can choose my own hours, but I wish that I got paid more.
Yeah. It's so true. And it's a big price to pay for the flexibility. I must say that what I really ping on the company as being a massive achievement is how they've gone into cities that have got monopolies, particularly with taxi licensing, and they have fought and busted them open. And it started in San Francisco when I was living there, but actually, if I remember the story right, wasn't the fight with New York pretty feisty for Uber?
Yeah, it has been in most of the large markets that have entrenched taxi industries, like especially London. I think London and New York were some of their biggest regulatory fights. But they're still here. But they've gotten kicked out of cities like Austin, much smaller markets, but
that's right.
That's a bigger grassroots movement, I think, to have them do deeper background checks on their drivers.
Yep, that's been a big issue. They had a terrible scandal in India where one of their executives was fired for accessing the case files from an alleged rape incident. They've had all sorts. They had one of their female engineers come out and talk about what's been happening at the company. They're in the list goes on. They're in a legal battle with Google for the alleged stealing of proprietary data. We also had in February his moment. Do you remember the dash cam video of him talking to a driver?
Yeah, and he kind of told him, I don't really want to listen to your grievances. Tough shit. Sorry. And then, and this is what we're talking about right now is just what's happened so far this year, which is additionally their grey ball tool, which was avoiding regulators in cities allegedly. And then there was a big issue that their supposed autonomous vehicle technology is largely done manually by some elf in the back. It really is, and this is just in the last 6 months. He was entangled with President Trump. And this is just the last 6 months. So it is really you couldn't write a story this dramatic, and it all goes in light of really up until the last year or so, they've been a heavyweight champion of the world in San Francisco. They've really been leading the pack, and I think that it's just such a stark contrast and such a quick fall from grace. Right? I don't remember many companies. Maybe Zenefits comes to mind. I can't remember a company that's gone sideways so quickly. Can you? No, and I think that's why we just had to take this episode to dive a little deeper into some pieces of media that can give us a little bit of a window into Travis's thinking over the past couple of years as he's talked to other big names in media and in tech. Right.
So we've gone for actually deconstructing two different interviews, right? Let's talk about these two, so the listeners, if they're interested, they can call up the entire interview. So tell us about them.
So if you search Fireside Chat and Travis Kalanick on YouTube, you should find one from 2015 with Mark Benioff of Salesforce. And then you should also find one with Arianna Huffington in November of 2016, a few months after she was installed on the board of Uber.
That's right. That was right. And I think we should put one thing in context here. They're a little softball because Ariana is, as you mentioned, she's on the board, so it's all pretty softball stuff. But he does reveal some really interesting things. Mark, on the other hand, a little less softball, but still very generous in the interview. So it's not quite the rigor of a TED or maybe a Recode, but we dug up some great nuggets that give us a peek into the mind of Travis. And I think also, too, there's a lot of lessons to learn here. So do you want to fire up the first clip and introduce that one?
Sure. And this is just Travis trying to succinctly explain the business model of Uber, at least how he sees it, as the kind of marketplace or platform that they've created at Uber.
It's sort of that consistency in you getting a pickup in a short period of time, and you having that sort of safe, efficient ride from point A to point B. And so of course on the operations side, that means, we need to get thousands and thousands of partners on our system all the time. Literally every week we're onboarding thousands of people in San Francisco, right? And for a thing like Dreamforce, we're gonna actually start doing additional onboarding weeks ahead of time to make sure that we're planning for this kind of thing. So we have to predict demand so that we can then match it with supply. There's an marketing and operations aspect, which is, okay, how do we get more partners on the system? How many do we need? How do we get them on the system? How do we streamline that onboarding? There's a filtering process to make sure they're qualified and they're Uber. And then once they're on the system, they're providing rides. And so you need to make sure that, we need to do everything we can to make sure that those routes are good, that they're getting people from point A to point B efficiently.
And so a little context for that clip, he's really just explaining the reactivity and scale that Uber brings. So Dreamforce is a conference in San Francisco that brings tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 people to the city. So they predict that demand and know that they have to onboard more partners or drivers to be able to meet the demand of moving people all around. And from what I've read, it really seems like they have a very streamlined process to get as many drivers on board as quickly as possible to meet this demand, which is really interesting in how they predict it, and then actively, try and meet that demand before it actually materializes.
Right. So I can definitely confirm the city literally does come to a standstill during Dreamforce week. It's an absolute nightmare, to be honest. I think that there's a really big thing inside of here. I think why we love this clip is for all of our listeners who are working on new ideas, trying to bring disruptive products to market. The model they're using is what we call this two-sided marketplace, and you can think about Airbnb as another great example of this. What's critical is, this is the art of this type of business model, is you must continuously be recalibrating your supply and demand, because the greatest challenge they face is having either too many drivers or not enough. They are because they don't operate the vehicles, they are pushing operational responsibility, ownership to the driver. So they really have to create a very seamless way for them to continually get new riders. On the other hand, they always need to supply new riders for the drivers. And it sounds very simplistic, but it's incredibly hard. And this is really the first step in them creating magic. The second thing that I think is really in here, and I'm sure you can imagine, is how much data they are collecting on both sides and the sort of predictive analysis they can do with that. So this is the key, is using the data to continuously create that equilibrium. So just to see how amazing they really are as a company. Can you actually remember the last time, Chad, you waited more than 10 minutes for an Uber?
I think it was maybe when I was catching a flight at like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. But yeah, it was a while ago.
Right. And if you think about life before Uber, not only have I waited 20 or 30 minutes for cabs, but when I was living in San Francisco, trying to get to the San Francisco airport, I twice was stood up by the yellow cab company, and the taxi actually never came at all. And this was around the time that Uber was just starting in San Francisco. So by using the two-sided marketplace and this predictive and analytical thinking, they have made things, and to go back to our Elon show, they have made things well beyond 10 times better. It's phenomenal, the improvement they've added to getting around cities. I think it's fantastic. So this really is at the heart of their success.
Yeah, and another interesting point along with the data is Uber is not a public company at this point, but they've disclosed a lot of financial information that a normal public company would, I think, kind of to get themselves prepared to eventually go public. But what you realize is all of that data that they collect allows all of these companies that are interested in investing in them know and build their own financial models for the success of the company. They can see how many new riders are coming on month after month, and they can see this growth trajectory. I mean, in my opinion, that's why they raised, $1 billion or over $1 billion in a round of funding, because the data and the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, so if you want to look at this a bit further, Chad, there's a movement.uber.com is a website that they've actually built where you can actually dive in some anonymized data and check it all out. So also for our listeners, we'll put it in the show notes, which you can get at moonshots.io. But that's also a cool way to check out some of the data stuff that they're doing. What is the next clip on our lovely friend Travis Kalanick?
That's I think this is one that you were going to introduce, but just a quick bit of history on Travis. He dropped out of UCLA, like so many startup founders, and worked with some friends on a company called Scour, which was kind of a precursor and contemporary to Napster, file sharing, media sharing, and took his learnings from that company and founded Red Swoosh, which kind of took that file sharing technology and took it to the enterprise, how to efficiently distribute media for enterprises, pre-Amazon, AWS, and other content delivery networks that are kind of so pervasive today. But he had some interesting stories about, the beginnings at Uber.
Okay, let's jump into our next clip. And here Travis is talking about the very early days of starting the company and the role that he played in getting limousine companies to participate in at the time, a very unknown project.
I'm putting an Excel sheet and just old school. The term is like dialing for dollars. I'm calling up every limo company I can in San Francisco, and I'm calling them up. And your pitch at the beginning, your first pitch, they hang up on you right away, and then you start getting it. And it was like, I want to be your biggest customer. I can help you make 50% more in a week. And that's where it started.
And how was that received? How were those calls?
So a third of the calls, basically I got hung up on before I got to the core pitch. Okay. A third of the calls they heard about a minute and a half, and then I got hung up on. And then a third were like, this is interesting.
So dialing for dollars, huh? I can actually see him. It's almost like boiler room style, right? You can just imagine him hitting the phones. I wonder if he had like this huge bell if he got a deal. I mean, that seems pretty spot on for him. I thought this told us a lot about not only what they did, but kind of that style, right, Chad? Like just dialing for dollars.
Yeah, and this was before they had any kind of tech product too. I think it's often overlooked sometimes. If people think, well, the genius is in building the technology, but I think Travis's tenacity and just going after these companies is really, how he's able to find product market fit and say, oh, well, there's all these limousines that are idle for half the time. Why can't me and my, buddies, pay them and, go out on the town in a Lincoln Town Car?
Right. And going back to the two-sided marketplace idea that we mentioned earlier, crucial. He goes on to talk about how everyone wanted to get onto this service before it was an app, but he actually needed to get lots of drivers on, so he was just hitting the phone book and getting people in. So very good insight into the hustle that you need to have in the early stages of a company. You want to introduce our next one, Chad?
Yeah, these next two clips are, I think, Travis's interesting statements around what the product that Uber is delivering and what they're doing. So here's him explaining the three different pillars of the product and kind of what Uber does.
It's three things for product. One, convenience, easier to get around, super efficient, reliable, all those things we talked about. Two, it's affordable, right? And three, a certain amount of magic. When you do those three things, you basically know everything Uber's going to do. If something's moving from somewhere to somewhere else in a city, that's our jam.
I love that's our jam.
I know. I just feel it would be appropriate to high five right now. A fist pump. What do you think? It'd be a fist pump for Trav.
Yeah. Well, I think he sees a lot of his work as jamming. If you listen to other interviews that he's done, I think that's kind of a core way in which he works, surrounding himself with other highly driven people, talented people, and just sit down and jam. Right.
What did you think of his three pillars of product? How did that resonate with you?
It goes back to you talking about reliability and how long do we have to wait for an Uber now? It's really practically no time at all, and so I think that metric for them has worked. I think that driving down the time, to get an Uber and just getting you and passengers to their destinations quickly, I think has really worked out for them.
Totally, and that's at the heart of their 10x model, making things 10 times better. They are really making massive inroads there, and we'll talk about that a bit later as well. I'm really keen to play the next couple of clips because, as I said earlier, the scale these guys have achieved in such a short time is off the charts. Totally ridiculous scale. I mean, I want you to think about when most companies that folks are working in maybe 20 to 100 people. And when you add another 10 or 20 to that, it feels like a lot. These guys are adding thousands and thousands of employees every quarter. It's really quite ridiculous. So we're going to hear him talking with Ariana this time and talking about some of his the growth of Uber.
To give you an example, 3 years ago, we were 200 people. And we're 10,000 people today, right? It's 3 years ago, we might have been doing, 50,000 rides a week. And we're closing in on 100 million rides a week.
Wow. So gazillions of rides all the time. But I think the thing we can really relate to is literally their offices are growing by thousands and thousands of people. And that's happening all the time. So remarkable when you think it's only been around for 8 years, and Uber as a company, since even this recording, is now almost at 12,000 people. And along with all of this scale, I think Travis has been presented with lots of surprises. So in this next clip, he's going to be talking to Mark about the biggest surprise he's had on the journey so far.
Look, my last company, the biggest we got was 12 people, employees, right? And for most of the time, it was me and one engineer. The first 4 years, I wasn't really getting a salary those years. So I know what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and entrepreneur usually means that. So I think the thing that's just the most surprising, you'd never expect it, you don't plan for it, you shouldn't plan for it, is this kind of just huge impact and growth and size and all of this, and as quickly as it's come. And there's a lot of lessons to learn. There's a lot of, I mean, if your company's going to grow like that, you got to grow too.
I feel like he's really starting to get to how we ended up with him taking a leave of absence, all these scandals. And I think he's really presenting us with, he's giving us a little window into the challenge he's faced with that scale. What did you think of that, Chad, when you heard that from him?
Yeah, it's interesting because Mark posed it as like what's been your biggest surprise? And I think Travis kind of answered as what his biggest challenge has been. I think at the core, Travis is realizing that he's on a rocket ship and he can really only do so much to steer the course of that massive growth. And I think he's beginning in this interview in 2015, he's beginning to understand like what he needs to do as a leader and as a CEO for the company, to keep the company on track and for it to do well, not just, for the customers and investors, but also for their own employees.
Yeah. I mean, you can just imagine, right? All of the taking care of the riders, taking care of the drivers, the staff, the regulators, the cities. I mean, it's endless, right?
Yeah, and I think this next clip too is some interesting foreshadowing. Again, taken in context, this clip's from 2015, and then based on all the news that's been breaking here at the beginning of 2017.
The values that a founder has for his or her company is usually a reflection of their own values. So for me, I don't differentiate between my personal values and my company's values. They're very much the same. And so I try to live by them regardless of whether I'm on the clock or not.
I couldn't resist putting this clip in. I think it is a little bit of a gotcha for Travis. But it's maybe a sign that he was overlooking, or I don't want to say being flippant about, building an inclusive and respectful culture. But, he did say this probably at the same time where many of these issues within the company began.
Right. And what's critical here is that at the heart of what he's getting to is sort of a contradiction, is that the values that he says are he's clearly not acted on. So I do feel I understand already we have this context of how hard it was for Travis at Uber to get from scrappy to big and to scale. And to kind of fall over himself here, it really just tells you that the guy needed already in 2015, he needed help. So it really, to me, makes me go, what were the board doing? Were they just on the rocket ride and enjoying it? Because, they did bring in Ariana way too late because, the problems had well and truly set in. But he really kind of trips over himself here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I want to turn the question to you, Mike, actually. You've been a part of companies large and small, founded on your own, and part of companies that have been founded by others. What's been your experience in managing that people growth, within the company, going from one person to 5 people, or from 5 people to 500 people?
Wow. So definitely my thing is that once you hit 20 people, all the practices that got you to 20 people, most of them don't work anymore because you need to insert middle management. So the founders are not able to just be jamming, as Travis would say. And so it does really, really change. And I think, hire slow, fire fast, man. Like, just be so rigorous on who you hire. The best quote I can give you there is Mark Andreessen says, you're only as good as your worst person. And I think it's so true. So hiring people because it's convenient, not because it's adding something, is often a big mistake. And really, because of my experience, I would say, as usually as a founder or co-founder, I have to admit that in the end, it's really upon the founders when values and culture get off track. It can be easy to blame others, but in the end of the day, it's on the founders, nobody else. And just it's got to work at the top, because you can't just assume it's just not going to happen for everybody. It's lead by example.
And so that's probably what culminated in Travis kind of finally taking back and taking a leave of absence. Now he's kind of owning up to that in a way, right?
Yeah, total respect. And obviously we should mention that his parents were in a tragic boating accident, and his mother actually passed as a result. And so his dad's not well. So there's a lot of things happening for him. But from the Uber side of things, I think that this next clip we're going to play is really starting to touch not on the values, but on really, we're shifting over to the business side. What's the end value that they're creating, and how does the business model work out of that? So this next clip is him talking about this idea of how they actually create time rather than take it.
Then we're not selling your time. We're actually, we're giving time back. We're making your time more valuable. And we believe that sort of, we have these like 4 sort of dimensions of magic at Uber. And one of them is about time and giving people that time back. So because of what we do, I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't say, we're not a Silicon Valley, we're not a Silicon Valley company because we think of it different. We're just not a media company. And so while media companies might take a little slice, we will give more than that back through efficiency, and that's kind of what we do.
Now, you've been exposed to the media world a lot. When you heard this one, Chad, what was your first reaction about, taking time, paying for time, monetizing time? What was your thought?
I think it's really smart on his part to position Uber in that way against all of these media companies that are vying for people's time. I think if you ask him, he would say that, time is our biggest luxury, and his aim is to give that back to people, through the convenience and the reliability of the service. And I think that that's how Uber sees, a greater good that they're giving to people, is they're giving people their time back in a way.
Yeah, and I totally buy that, right? Because I think about how exploited my time is by social services such as Facebook, and how they're monetizing my private information. I really like the fact that Uber doesn't have that. How do you feel about companies like Facebook and Snapchat monetizing you as being the media yourself and your private information?
Well, I personally am not on social media at all. I think partly because of that principle. I am a little, I don't know. I don't like that. I don't like that feeling that, if you don't know what the product is, you're the product.
Yes.
And so our time and attention is that product. That's not to say that I, flitter away my time with other pursuits, but it's an interesting jab from Travis to companies like Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram saying, our business model doesn't rely on monetizing people's time and attention. We're actually giving that back to people.
Don't you think it's interesting, though, that in a way, if you take a social network such as Facebook, or you take an Airbnb and Uber, they're all walking at this fine line of exploitation, right?
Yeah, they're finding the arbitrage, right? It's like, can we get the drivers to drive for a low enough price, to get all the users on board? And, if they can, then their business model works. If not, then it doesn't. Yeah.
I find this really interesting. What I love about their business model is how clean it is, because the people using are paying, whereas the the challenge that I have with Facebook is, in the end of the day, they're exploiting their customer to resell that to a third party, and that's just feels dangerous to me. From just thinking pure business model perspective, because you're essentially beholden to the trust that your users have of you, and if you ever break that, I mean, it's easy to break and hard to gain. So it feels long term, the likes of Google, Facebook, Snapchat, etc., have quite a big risk around trust, which to a certain extent Uber has, but there's more of a direct relationship. You pay, you're the customer, you're paying, you're receiving the service, and there's not this introduction of a third paying party. However, there are obviously drivers involved in the picture here. Very interesting breakdown on time, right?
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see, how the Uber business model plays out. Can they make Uber, cheaper than owning a car? And if so, does that mean that no one will own cars? They'll just Uber around everywhere. That's what they're betting on, but we have to, we'll have to still wait and see.
Right. So what's coming up next? We've gone into the time headspace. I think you got another clip on more of a personal angle, right?
Yeah, I think one of Ariana's initiatives with her own company, Thrive Global, is speaking about the benefits of sleep and de-stressing yourself, to not overwork yourself, which I think is in some ways in direct conflict with Travis's history as an entrepreneur and CEO at Uber. And so here's Travis kind of talking about how he's matured through the years while working as CEO of Uber.
If I'm super honest, like I was, as an entrepreneur, I've matured over time, right? And so I'm less mature today than I will be tomorrow. And I used to think that not sleeping was a good thing.
A competitive advantage.
And it was really interesting because I was sort of in my own process of maturation as an entrepreneur, which I've been in, since the beginning, but I was sort of realizing that was dumb. And then we meet.
I just found that such a telling insight into the growth he's been on. And I hear that and I just think, wow, and he's been able to get the company this far. I mean, it seems I don't know who's gone on the biggest scale up, Travis or the company.
Yeah, I think for anyone interested in a deeper look into the history of Uber and Travis's beginnings, there's a brand new book called Wild Ride: Inside Uber's Quest for World Domination, written by Adam Lashinsky, who's wrote some books about Apple and others. It's really great. You should check it out.
Okay.
We'll put it in the show notes. But I think my answer is I think Travis has been forced into the biggest transformation simply because for one person to be in charge of the company over this growth trajectory, no one has done that as quickly in the CEO position as Travis. Like he's, as far as I know, the only person that's had to go through that insane growth in such a short period of time, not only for the company, but for himself personally, which is why it's interesting that he connected with Ariana Huffington, who is seemingly on the outside kind of a very opposed personality in a way.
Yes, I think that's exactly what he needs. And I think that, I was reflecting on this, and what to me is really obvious is how exceptional Zuckerberg was, because Zuckerberg went and recruited Sheryl Sandberg. And what is clear now is Travis really needed his own Sheryl, didn't he? And so it really sets him up. I was thinking about what I call the cursed founder CEO, and it reminds me of Jerry Yang, founder and CEO at one time of Yahoo. And then I was researching this. Have you ever heard of this guy called David Nellerman? Have you heard of this guy?
No.
Okay, so check this out. He founded JetBlue, but he's also founded like 3 other airlines. And he is like the world's biggest archetype of the cursed founder CEO, because he always founds and then has to move on. So he founded Jetblue. I'm going to look up this list of companies while we're chatting. It's off the charts. The guy has and setting up an airline is no small task, right?
Yeah, I mean, very few people have done it.
Yeah, so listen to this. He's done Morris Air, WestJet, JetBlue, and he's now currently the Azul Brazilian Airlines CEO. So amazing to have done all that. But I just see a lot of challenges ahead for Travis, and I think he was, if I could pinpoint one thing organizationally, he doesn't have a Sheryl Sandberg. It's nice to have Ariana, but he needs a Sheryl, and I don't know if he can come back from this. What would you say?
Yeah, I think at the start of Uber, someone that was very integral into helping Travis run operations was Ryan Graves, kind of one of the very early people at the company. And I think they just haven't recruited enough experienced executives fast enough. I don't think they realized how fast that they would have to do that. And I think that that's what's kind of come back to bite them now, is that they were on an unprecedented accelerated growth rate. They just didn't know simply how quickly they had to hire people and find their Sheryl Sandbergs.
Yeah, and so we want to be fair to Travis here. This growth is unprecedented. So, what you're hiring for today could be very different tomorrow. But he did attempt to get a guy called Jeff Jones, who was the CMO at Target. And Jeff actually joined, but he lasted only 6 months. And when he left, in a not too easy way. He really said the culture is rotten and I'm out of here. So it shows.
And there were a few others around the same time as well, where I know that Travis and the executive team had invested, dozens of hours in vetting and hiring these people, but they didn't last very long.
Yeah. And so one of the greatest ironies here is that for all of the tech and business success, how limited that is if you don't have the people thing right. So they've got great product, great business model, and the people is where they fall short. And this reminds me of a great framework for our listeners. Before you get too deep into your little innovation or your disruption or product, think about your new company in these terms: people, product, and profit. And you've got to have all of those 3 working together. And quite clearly, Travis has really excelled with a great product, with a great business model, doesn't own a single car, it's all good. But not having people, not having the culture to support that. I mean, you would literally have needed the Golden State Warriors of executives in order to get this job done. So in fairness to him, it would have been 1 in a million chance of having the people.
Yeah, they're in the unfortunate or fortunate, depending on how you see it, situation of being in that hyper growth trajectory that no other company has experienced to date. Yeah,
totally. I think we could jam on poor Travis for hours, but I know we have one more great clip around this idea of story, which I think speaks a lot to where Uber's at. Do you want to set this up for the listeners, and we'll give one last clip a run?
Oh, it's an interesting kind of meta commentary. Here we are sitting here, talking about Uber and everything that Travis has done or not done there. It's just an interesting reflection on his part about the power of story.
If you grow like we've grown and you're like a black box. You're not telling your story. You're showing by example, and actions speak louder than words, all these things. Then people fill that box with whatever gets clicks, And so you need to. One of the things that that as a guy with an engineering background, you have to learn how to tell your story.
He's so right. When you're pitching for investment, for customers, when you're even trying to pitch people you're recruiting to your company, you need to have the story. And I think I would defer to, you must know, Chad, Simon Sinek and The Power of Why, right?
Yeah, I love that book.
Right. For our listeners, we'll put it in the show notes. Go to moonshots.io. This is a really incredible book. And what I want to characterize for everyone is like, you have to realize that most engineering entrepreneurs and innovators like Travis, they are obsessed with what they do, okay? We have a widget that does something, right? And this is their preoccupation, right? But the problem is other human beings really don't care so much about the what. They care about how you do something. And the how is more like, how are you different? What's the style? What's the way in which you get the what done that makes you so special? So often in executive speak, it's like, what's your USP or your point of difference? But even more so at the biggest point of it, it's like, why are you doing this? And I always try to frame from people, don't say why you are doing it, but also why are you doing this in terms of what happens in the world when you do your thing in your special way? What's the net positive impact? And you can see that what Travis is saying is they were going so fast, they were busy with the what. And everybody sort of disconnected with how they were doing things and why they were doing things. And I felt that if he had had that framework where he could have talked about that, I think he could have done a much better job, at least externally, don't you think, Chad?
Yeah, and I think, just like you said, it's his circumstances that really forced him into the what in the execution and making sure that it happened, and that it didn't, that things didn't just unravel for him, which could have been, it could have easily been the case, right? Uber would not have gotten to this point of over $60 billion valuation without Travis there at the helm. But I think he's in this clip really finally realizing, well, you know what? We probably didn't do the best job of telling our own story. And now we're going to make that, more important and a core part of what we do.
Yeah. And I think you can still see the journey he's got, because he's still a little bit, and if folks go and have a listen to the entire talk, he's still a little bit blaming others for filling in the gaps of the story. He's got to make a little bit of a jump to, hey, it's my story. I have to own it. But I think he could get there. But when I reflect on this, I guess like with the benefit of hindsight, Chad, where do you think he could have done things differently? What are the few things that you take out of this? Like, note to self. What are the big learnings on this one from looking at Travis?
I think you put it well when you said start with the why. And with Uber, I think focusing on their core service of moving people and things within cities and how that gives people more time to do the things that they want to do, and giving partners or drivers opportunities to earn a living. I think those are the core elements of Uber's story, focusing on the drivers that are able to make an extra buck to buy a gift for their daughter for their birthday, and getting cancer patients to their appointments. These are all things that I know that they are doing.
Yeah.
But somehow that's not,
they're not coming through.
Yeah, it's just not coming through all the noise. And so I think they've been stuck in this reactionary mode instead of like discovering and going deep into their own story and really owning it and really, pushing it out there in an effective way. And
by having that frame of telling your story better, you look at the contrast between him and Elon, and man, Elon is so out in front. Like, he's just got the world awaiting his next announcement. Whereas with Uber, you can tell like they're on the back foot, and they're just continually protecting and defending. So for sure, I love it. I do think another big learning for me was, Travis doesn't have to have all the answers, but he needed to bring a consigliere on board. He desperately needs his Sheryl Sandberg, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a mini. He needed a mini Ariana to be full-time on staff, not just a board member. I mean, he needs
and that much sooner.
Oh, it feels like 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, any other things you think, with the benefit of hindsight, he could have done?
I'm not sure that I have much to add. I would just like to know more about Uber from Uber or from Uber insiders. I don't think that they, from my perspective, have done a great job of sharing that information. I think a lot of yours and my exposure is these articles, that are getting clicks, as Travis says. And at some point, Uber is going to have to see the media as an ally for them to be able to share their story. Yeah. But I mean, I'm not a PR strategist, so I don't know that I have some specific strategies for that.
Yeah. Maybe there's this. I mean, it's a bit controversial, but maybe they just pushed too hard on the gas pedal. Maybe it got a little too rough and bouncy along the way. Maybe they needed to just slow down. Like maybe Uber Eats, one of the newer initiatives, maybe they should have put that on the back burner and kept the trains running on time, so to speak, because it seems like they just got a little too close to the sun. But luckily, obviously there is some wisdom there. He's taking a time out. The question is, they have to get leadership in place that they don't only functionally get the job done, but behaviorally, in terms of culture and values, really get it right. Because as we said, they've got the business model, they've got the product. It's whether they've got the people, the culture to nurture all of these possibilities. It's such a force for positive change in the world, but a lot of hygiene and homework to get done in the meantime.
It's a really remarkable story, yeah, and I'm glad we were able to get together and kind of put this podcast together on such short notice. We wanted to kind of jump onto the media cycle and be sure that we provided you, our listeners, some information and context for what's going on.
Yeah, totally, and a great contrast to our first one. I think, Chad, do you want to give a shout out? We got some great feedback and support from folks. You want to give a shout out to some of those folks?
Yeah, thank you everyone to listening on our first podcast on Elon Musk. I specifically want to say thank you to Travis and Christine and Shannon for your reviews and feedback on the show. It means a lot to us that you take the time to go on this journey with us, exploring the lives of these innovators, disruptors, founders, and in the great companies that they're trying to build. I'd encourage all of you to follow everything that we're doing here at moonshots.io. And Mike, do you have anything else to add?
Let's say, well, we should say that short of some more news fairies dropping, we will do Jeff Bezos for our next episode. So looking forward to him. I put him right up there with Elon. What about you, Chad? Elon, Jeff, greatest innovator of our time. Where are you coming out?
I don't know. I'm really kind of falling in love with the story of Amazon as I'm doing kind of some deep background research. I think in terms of Jeff Bezos has the longevity on Elon. So we may just need a little bit more time, to see where both of their companies end up.
Yes, and we should mention that Jeff's been busy. He just bought a little company called Whole Foods, which is very exciting, kind of different, coming from different places on culture there. Jeff is very hard on value and price. Whole Foods is certainly not that. So what a fascinating combination. We're going to be studying that and discussing that in the next show. I think we should invite listeners, send us all your ideas and feedback. Please, we need you guys to tell us what works and what doesn't. the show notes, Chad. We're going to put all of the show notes together with all the goodies from this episode. Where will they find those show notes?
On moonshots.io. And please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, your podcatcher of choice. You can also find us on SoundCloud, and leave us a review. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, Chad, great chatting, all things Uber, and I can't wait to talk about Amazon and Bezos next week.
All right, we'll speak to you next time, Mike. Thanks.
Bye.